Blood stained the snow-covered cobblestones of Winterbourne Castle, but the guilt belonged to someone else. Gabrielle stood in heavy iron chains before the Alpha King, ready to surrender her life for a crime her brother didn't commit. She thought she had fooled them all. She was dead wrong. The frigid winds of midwinter howled through the stone corridors of the Freeman estate, carrying with them the undeniable metallic stench of fresh blood. Gabrielle Freeman, the eldest daughter of a once proud but now fading werewolf lineage, bolted upright in her bed. Her wolf lashed against her ribs, sensing danger long before her human ears picked up the stumbling, heavy footsteps echoing in the hall. Throwing a heavy fur mantle over her nightgown, Gabrielle rushed out of her chambers, only to find her younger brother, Abner, collapsed at the base of the grand staircase. He was gasping for air, his fine velvet tunic soaked in deep crimson, but it wasn't his blood. "Abner!" Gabrielle dropped to her knees, her hands frantically searching his body for a wound. Finding none, she grabbed his face, forcing his glazed, unfocused eyes to meet hers. "Abner, look at me. What happened? Whose blood is this?" Abner's jaw trembled. He was heavily drugged, his pupils dilated so wide his irises were barely visible. I don't know, Genna," he slurred, his voice breaking. "I was at the tavern. Lord Harrington's men bought me an ale. Then, everything went dark. I woke up in the snow outside the royal gates. There was a body, a knife. Gabrielle's blood ran cold. She noticed his trembling hand gripping something tight. Prying his fingers open, she gasped. It was a silver-laced dagger, an ancient heirloom bearing the roaring wolf crest of the Freeman family. The blade was coated in thick, congealed blood, but it was the scent clinging to the hilt that made her stomach drop. It was the distinct, earthy scent of Lord Henry Cavendish, the Alpha King's most trusted advisor and chief strategist. A sharp, piercing howl shattered the night outside their estate. The Royal Guard. They were already here. Gabrielle's mind raced. Abner was 19, reckless, easily manipulated, but he was no murderer. More importantly, he was the sole male heir to the Freeman name. If he fell, their house would be stripped of its lands, and their pack would be absorbed by their bitter rivals, the Harringtons. The framing was perfect. It was a political execution disguised as justice. "Listen to me," Gabrielle hissed, hauling her brother up and shoving him toward his chambers. "Take off that tunic. Burn it in the hearth. Scrub your hands with lye and pine oil. You never left this house tonight. Do you understand me?" "Genna, what are you doing?" Abner wept, too weak to fight her as she tore the bloody dagger from his grasp. "I am saving our family," she whispered fiercely. As the heavy oak doors of the manor splintered open under the force of the royal guards, Gabrielle made her choice. She deliberately dragged the blade across her own palm, letting her fresh blood mix with the old, masking Abner's faint scent on the hilt. She smeared the crimson evidence across her own white nightgown, holding the dagger out in plain sight just as Captain Frederick burst into the foyer, a dozen armed wolves at his back. "Gabrielle Freeman," Captain Frederick snarled, his eyes locking onto the bloody weapon. "By order of Alpha King Alder Martinez, drop the weapon and surrender. You are accused of the high treason and murder of Lord Henry Cavendish." "I surrender," Gabrielle said, her voice eerily calm as the silver-laced dagger clattered onto the stone floor. "I killed him. I alone bear the guilt." The march to Winterbourne Castle was a blur of freezing rain and biting humiliation. Gabrielle was paraded through the lower bailey, her wrists bound in heavy iron shackles. The citizens of the pack, awoken by the commotion, hurled insults and rotting cabbage at her. She kept her chin high, her eyes fixed on the towering spires of the King's Keep. Every step was a step toward the executioner's block, but it was a step away from her brother's doom. She was violently thrown to her knees in the grand throne room. The massive iron braziers roared with fire, casting long, dancing shadows across the polished black marble floor. At the end of the hall sat Alpha King Alder Martinez. He was a terrifying vision of primal authority. Broad-shouldered and imposing, Alder possessed piercing amber eyes that seemed to strip away flesh to look directly at a person's soul. His jaw was clenched so tight the muscles twitched, and the raw, oppressive weight of his alpha aura forced every wolf in the room, including Gabrielle, to lower their heads. A Freeman, Alder's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that vibrated through the stone floor. He stood up, slowly descending the steps of his dais. "My finest beta, a man who survived 3 wars, found slaughtered in the snow. And the killer is a noblewoman who paints in watercolors and attends afternoon teas? He stopped directly in front of her. The scent of him wood smoke, cold iron, and raw power enveloped her, making her heart hammer against her ribs. He crouched down, forcing a gloved finger under her chin to lift her gaze. "I confess to the crime, Your Majesty," Gabrielle said, her voice steady. She had repeated the lie so many times in her head on the walk over that she almost believed it. That conviction masked the scent of deceit that a werewolf would normally exude when lying. "He insulted my family's honor. I lost my temper." Alder's amber eyes narrowed. He inhaled deeply, catching the scent of her blood, her fear, and her unyielding resolve. There was no lie in her scent, but his instincts, the primal wolf within him, that had kept him on the throne for a decade, screamed that this was wrong. "Lock her in the deep dungeons," Alder commanded without breaking eye contact with Gabrielle. "Do not use silver chains. Iron will suffice. No one is to speak to her. No one is to touch her. I will deal with her personally." The royal dungeon was a masterclass in psychological torture. It was entirely carved from the bedrock beneath Winterbourne Castle, dripping with freezing condensation and reeking of centuries of despair. Gabrielle sat on a thin bed of straw, shivering as the damp cold seeped into her bones. She watched the single torch flickering in the corridor, counting the drops of water falling from the ceiling to maintain her sanity. "Abner is safe," she told herself repeatedly. "Abner is safe." It had been 2 days, 2 days of total isolation, left alone with the impending reality of a public beheading. Footsteps broke the oppressive silence. They were heavy, measured, and accompanied by the distinct clicking of boots on wet stone. The heavy iron door of her cell groaned open, and the towering silhouette of Alder Martinez filled the frame. He stepped inside, dismissing the guards with a sharp flick of his wrist. He didn't wear his crown down here, nor the heavy ceremonial furs. He was dressed in a simple, dark leather tunic and breeches, making him look less like a king and more like a warrior. He carried a heavy wooden chair from the corridor, set it down in front of her, and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. For a long time he just looked at her. "You haven't eaten?" Alder noted, his voice devoid of the booming theatricality it held in the throne room. It was quiet, conversational, and infinitely more intimidating. "It is difficult to maintain an appetite when one is measuring the days until they meet the headsman," Gabrielle replied dryly, pulling her thin, blood-stained mantle tighter around her shoulders. "Do you know why I haven't ordered your execution yet, Lady Gabrielle?" "Because you wish to parade me before the Pack Council to make an example of my family," she answered bitterly. "No," Alder said softly. He leaned in closer, his amber eyes locking onto hers. "Because you are lying, and I am trying to figure out how you have managed to completely suppress the scent of a lie from an alpha." Gabrielle's breath hitched, but she forced her heart rate to remain steady. "I am not lying. The dagger was mine. The blood on it was his," I confessed. "What more do you need, Your Majesty?" "A motive that actually makes sense," Alder countered quickly. "Henry Cavendish was 60 years old, a seasoned warrior who outweighed you by 100 pounds. You expect me to believe you bested him in single combat because of a perceived insult? Furthermore, I know you, Gabrielle. 3 years ago at the Solstice Festival, you spent 3 hours nursing a wounded raven back to health in the royal gardens. I watched you from the balcony. A woman who weeps over a broken bird does not butcher a man and leave him to rot in the snow." Gabrielle looked away, her cheeks flushing. He remembered her? The Solstice Festival had been a brief moment of magic in her otherwise rigid life. She had felt a strange pull that night, an electric tension in the air whenever the king was near, but she had dismissed it as awe. "People change, sire," she whispered. "Not their souls," Alder said firmly. He stood up, pacing the small cell. His wolf was restless. Ever since she had been brought before him, his inner beast had been pacing, growling at the sight of her in chains. It was an instinct he was struggling to suppress. "I visited your estate this morning. Your brother, Abner, is in a state of absolute hysteria. He tried to throw himself at my guards, screaming that he was the one who belonged in the dungeon." Gabrielle leaped to her feet, the iron chains rattling violently. "He is a foolish boy. He is grieving my impending death. His mind is shattered. You cannot listen to him." Alder stopped pacing and turned to her, a triumphant gleam in his eye. "Ah, there it is. The panic. The real emotion." He closed the distance between them in 2 massive strides, his presence overwhelming her. He reached out, his warm, calloused hand gently wrapping around her chained wrists. "You didn't kill Henry. You're protecting that idiot brother of yours." "I killed him," Gabrielle repeated, a tear finally slipping down her icy cheek. "Please, just sign the writ of execution. Let it be done." "I will not execute an innocent woman," Alder growled, his thumb subconsciously brushing against her pulse point. The contact sent a jolt of raw heat up her arm, making her gasp. Alder felt it too. His eyes widened slightly as the undeniable spark of a mate bond faint, but undeniably there flared between them. He quickly dropped her hands and took a step back, masking his shock with a stony expression. "I have my spy master, Gideon Royce, investigating the tavern where your brother was seen that night," Sayalder said, his tone strictly business once again. "Until I have the truth, you will remain here. But know this, Gabrielle, I will not let you throw your life away for a lie." As Alder left the dungeon, his mind was a storm, a mate bond, with the prime suspect in his beta's murder. The timing was disastrous. Up in the council chambers, a different storm was brewing. Lord Reginald Harrington, a sneering, ambitious man with a scarred jaw, slammed his fist on the heavy oak table. Beside him sat Lady Beatrice Kensington, a stunning but venomous woman who draped herself in silk and ambition. "The king delays," Lord Reginald spat, pouring himself a goblet of wine. The freeman wench confessed. "Why is her head not on a spike on the castle gates?" "Patience, Reginald," Lady Beatrice purred, admiring her perfectly manicured nails. "Alder is thorough. He suspects a larger plot, but he will find nothing. The poison we slipped, the boy wiped his memory perfectly. The guards found the dagger exactly where we planted it. And Cavendish, well, he took our little treasonous secret to the grave. If Alder does not execute the Freeman girl before the pack assembly tomorrow," Reginald growled, "the other lords will view it as weakness. A king who cannot avenge his own beta is no king at all. We will call for a vote of no confidence. Either way, the Freemans fall, and we take their lands, strengthening our numbers for the coup." Beatrice smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. "And I shall wear black to the execution. It brings out my eyes." The day of the pack assembly arrived with a cruel, biting frost. The great hall of Winterbourne Castle was packed to the rafters. Hundreds of lords, ladies, warriors, and pack elders crowded the tiered wooden galleries, their murmurs blending into a deafening hum of anticipation. Massive banners bearing the Martinez wolf crest hung from the vaulted ceilings, swaying in the draughts caused by the roaring hearths. Deep within the castle, Gideon Royce, the king's spymaster, slipped through the shadows of the royal archives. Gideon was a lean, scarred wolf who preferred the company of secrets over people. He held a small, leather-bound ledger in his hand. It was Cavendish's personal log, hidden in a false bottom of his desk, a desk Gideon had spent the last 2 nights meticulously dismantling. Gideon sprinted up the spiral stairs, bypassing the guards with a flash of his royal seal, and burst into the king's private solar. Alder was already dressed for the trial. He wore his formal armor, darkened steel engraved with ancient runes and a heavy cloak of black wolf fur. He looked like a god of war, but his eyes betrayed a sleepless night and agonizing tension. "Speak," Alder commanded, turning away from the window overlooking the courtyard where a wooden scaffold was already being constructed. "You were right, sire," Gideon breathed, bowing deeply. "Cavendish wasn't killed over a feud. He discovered a discrepancy in the southern tax lines. The Harrington and Kensington houses haven't just been skimming coin, they've been using it to purchase silver weaponry from the human rogues in the east. Cavendish logged it here. He was going to present it to you the morning he was killed." Alder's blood boiled, his fangs extended involuntarily, grazing his bottom lip. Treason. They murdered Henry to cover their coup, and framed the Freeman boy to eliminate a rival house and consolidate land in one stroke. "There is more," Gideon said, pulling a small vial from his pouch. "I investigated the tavern. The barkeep was suddenly very wealthy, but a little persuasion loosened his tongue. Lady Beatrice's personal guard paid him to serve Abner Freeman an ale laced with belladonna and foxglove. It mimics the scent of drunkenness but causes total blackouts. And the fatal wound on Cavendish? It was a precise strike to the subclavian artery. A master assassin's work. A drunken 19-year-old boy couldn't have made that strike if he tried. "We have the motive. We have the means," Alder growled. his amber eyes flashing with lethal intent. But we need them to confess publicly. If I execute Harrington and Kensington without public proof, their combined forces will rebel. I need to expose them before the entire assembly. How, sire? A dark, dangerous smile spread across Alder's face. By giving them exactly what they want, a trial and a guilty verdict. Down in the depths, the iron door opened for the final time. Captain Frederick and 4 heavily armed guards entered Gabrielle's cell. "It is time, my lady," Frederick said, his tone holding a surprising hint of pity. Gabrielle stood up. Her legs were weak from hunger and cold, but she refused to tremble. She smoothed down her ruined, blood-stained gown, squared her shoulders, and walked out of the cell. The journey to the great hall felt like walking underwater. Sounds were muffled, colors were muted. When the heavy double doors swung open, the sudden roar of the assembly hit her like a physical blow. Hundreds of eyes locked onto her. Some held anger, some held pity, but most held a morbid curiosity. She was led to the center of the hall and forced to her knees on a raised stone platform. Alder sat upon the Alpha throne, looking down at her. For a fraction of a second, their eyes met, and Gabrielle felt a strange, reassuring warmth wash over her through the bond she still didn't fully understand. But then Alder's expression hardened into an impenetrable mask of ice. Lord Reginald Harrington stood from his seat in the front row, puffing his chest out. "Your Majesty, the murderer is before us. She has confessed to the vile butchery of Lord Cavendish. We demand swift justice. The law dictates death by beheading for the murder of a high-ranking pack member." "Indeed, Lord Harrington," Alder's voice boomed, magically amplified to reach every corner of the vast hall. The crowd instantly silenced. "The law is clear. Gabrielle Freeman has confessed. However, pack law also demands a thorough review of the evidence before the king's blade falls." Lady Beatrice, seated beside Reginald, offered a delicate, venomous sigh. "Surely, Your Majesty, the bloody dagger found in her possession and her own words are evidence enough. Why prolong the girl's suffering?" "Because, Lady Beatrice," Alder said, slowly rising from his throne and descending the steps. The hall held its breath. The Alpha King was not acting like a judge. He was stalking like a predator. "I am deeply fascinated by the nature of the weapon used." Alder stopped before Gabrielle. He gestured to Gideon, who stepped forward carrying a silver tray. On it rested the Freeman dagger. "A beautiful weapon," Alder mused, picking it up by the blade, unfazed by the silver. "Heavy, unwieldy for a killing blow. But tell me, Lord Harrington, as a renowned warrior, if you were to stab a man of Cavendish's size through the chest, would the blade not strike bone?" Harrington frowned, exchanging a quick, nervous glance with Beatrice. "I suppose it would, sire." "It would," Alder confirmed loudly. "And yet, this blade is pristine. No chips, no dulled edges. Furthermore, the master physician examined Cavendish's body. The wound was 2 inches wide. This dagger is barely 1.5 inches across." A murmur rippled through the hall. Gabrielle looked up at Alder, her heart pounding. What was he doing? "This dagger did not kill Henry Cavendish," Alder declared, tossing the weapon onto the stone floor where it clanged loudly. "It was dipped in his blood after the fact, a prop used in a poorly written play." Harrington stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly. "Are you defending a confessed murderer, King Alder?" "She said she did it." "People say many things under duress, Reginald," Alder countered smoothly. "For instance, I have a barkeep in my custody who said, under duress, that he was paid in Kensington gold to drug Abner Freeman." The murmurs in the hall erupted into shouts. Lady Beatrice's face paled beneath her heavy makeup. "Lies!" she shrieked, losing her composed facade. "A peasant trying to extort nobles." "Silence!" Alder roared, unleashing his full alpha aura. The sheer force of it forced several weaker wolves in the room to their knees. Even Harrington stumbled back. Alder turned his back on the traitors and looked down at Gabrielle. He extended his hand to her. "Rise, Gabrielle Freeman." Trembling, she placed her small, cold hand in his massive, warm one. He pulled her to her feet, effectively shielding her with his own body from the rest of the hall. The gesture was not lost on the assembly. The king was claiming her under his protection. "You took the blame to save your brother," Alder said softly, meant only for her ears, though the bond between them flared brighter than a roaring hearth. Then, turning back to the assembly, His voice turned to thunder. The real traitors sit in the front row, and today they will face the judgment of the Alpha King. The atmosphere in the great hall shattered, fragmenting into 1,000 overlapping gasps, murmurs, and furious whispers. The accusation hung in the frigid air like a lit fuse, sizzling with the promise of absolute destruction. Lord Reginald Harrington's face cycled through a spectrum of colors from arrogant flush to sickly pale, and finally settling on a mottled, rage-fueled crimson. Lady Beatrice Kensington froze, her elegant facade cracking as her eyes darted frantically toward the heavy oak doors, calculating the distance to safety. "This is an outrage," Lord Reginald bellowed, his voice cracking under the oppressive weight of the king's aura. He stepped away from his chair, his hands curling into white-knuckled fists at his sides. "You dare accuse the most ancient and loyal houses of Winterbourne of such baseless treachery? You insult us to protect this confessed murderer? You are blinded by her, Alder. The Pack Assembly will not stand for this madness." King Alder did not flinch. He remained standing protectively in front of Gabrielle, his broad shoulders shielding her from the hostile glares of the crowd. "Loyalty, Reginald? Is that what you call the 60 crates of silver-forged broadswords currently sitting beneath floorboards in your northern estate?" A deafening silence slammed into the room. Even the crackling of the massive hearths seemed to quiet. Gideon Royce, the king's spymaster, stepped out from the shadows of the dais. He held up a thick, leather-bound ledger, its pages marked with dark red ink. "Lord Cavendish's personal logs," Gideon announced, his voice carrying the sharp precision of a striking blade. He meticulously documented every missing coin from the southern tax lines, tracing them directly to rogue human mercenaries in the east. The Harringtons and Kensingtons were arming a private militia. Cavendish was killed because he was bringing this ledger to the king the very morning he was found dead. "Lies!" Beatrice shrieked, her perfectly manicured hands gripping the wooden railing of the gallery. Her voice was shrill, desperate. Forgeries created by a desperate spymaster to appease a mad king. "We also intercepted your messenger raven this morning, Lady Beatrice," Gideon added smoothly, pulling a small scroll from his tunic. "A missive addressed to your rogue contacts, instructing them to march on Winterbourne the moment Gabrielle Freeman's head fell. A perfectly timed coup." The undeniable truth crashed over the assembly. The lords and ladies who had just been demanding Gabrielle's blood began to edge away from Reginald and Beatrice, their expressions twisting in horror and disgust. Realizing the trap had snapped shut around them, Reginald's survival instincts took over. He let out a guttural, terrifying roar, his eyes flashing a vivid, unnatural yellow. "Take them," Reginald commanded, drawing a hidden, silver-plated dagger from his boot. Chaos erupted. From the crowd, 24 guards bearing the Harrington and Kensington crests suddenly drew concealed weapons. They were not standard castle steel. They were gleaming, lethal silver. The traitors had infiltrated the assembly itself. Screams echoed against the vaulted ceilings as unarmed nobles scrambled over wooden pews to escape the sudden bloodshed. The king's royal guards, led by Captain Frederick, immediately drew their broadswords, clashing violently with the rebel forces. The sickening ring of metal striking metal filled the air, accompanied by the ferocious snarls of shifting wolves. Gabrielle stumbled back, her heavy iron chains weighing her down. She was defenseless, a sitting target in the middle of a war zone. 2 rebel guards broke through the royal defensive line, their silver blades raised, eyes locked on the king's exposed back. "Alder, behind you!" Gabrielle screamed, her voice tearing through her throat. Alder spun on his heel with terrifying speed. He did not bother to draw his sword. The Alpha King tapped into the primal, ancient magic of his bloodline. In a blur of motion, his hands elongated into razor-sharp claws, his eyes igniting with a blinding amber fire. He caught the first guard by the throat, hoisting the grown man off the ground with a single arm and hurling him across the stone floor as if he were made of straw. He ducked under the second guard's silver blade, driving a devastating clawed fist into the man's armored chest, shattering the breastplate and sending him crashing into a stone pillar. But the distraction was all Lord Reginald needed. Moving with unnatural speed fueled by pure desperation, Reginald bypassed Alder and lunged directly at Gabrielle. He knew his coup was failing, but he intended to take the king's newfound weakness down with him. Gabrielle saw him coming. The scarred, hateful face of the man who had framed her brother was contorted in a murderous snarl. She had no weapon, no freedom of movement, and no time. But she was a Freeman, and she would not die cowering on her knees. As Reginald thrust his silver dagger toward her heart, Gabrielle threw her entire body weight forward. She raised her arms, using the heavy, thick iron chain that bound her wrists as a makeshift shield. The silver blade struck the iron links with a shower of sparks, the force of the blow jarring her bones. Before Reginald could pull his weapon back for a second strike, a deafening, earth-shattering roar shook the very foundations of Winterbourne Castle. Alder collided with Reginald like a runaway freight train. The Alpha King tackled the treacherous lord to the ground, his raw, unbridled fury manifesting in a terrifying display of dominance. Alder did not fully shift, but his partial transformation was enough to dwarf Reginald completely. He pinned Harrington to the cold marble. One massive hand wrapped around his throat, cutting off his air supply instantly. "You touch what is mine, and you forfeit your life," Alder snarled, his voice a demonic, overlapping harmony of man and beast. The words echoed through the great hall, cutting through the din of battle. "What is mine?" The pack felt the truth of it reverberate in their very souls. The Alpha was claiming his mate. Across the room, Captain Frederick and Gideon Royce had successfully subdued the remaining rebel guards. Lady Beatrice was on her knees, sobbing hysterically as royal soldiers bound her wrists with silver cuffs. Her silk gown was torn, her ambitions reduced to ashes in the span of a few violent minutes. The battle was over. The traitors were broken. Alder slowly released Reginald's throat, allowing the royal guards to drag the gasping, defeated lord away in chains. The king stood, his chest heaving, his claws slowly retracting as he forced his inner wolf to heel. He turned to Gabrielle, his fierce amber eyes softening the moment they landed on her bruised, exhausted form. Without a word, Alder reached out, gripping the thick iron chain that bound her wrists. With a sharp, powerful twist of his hands, the metal groaned, warped, and finally snapped. Gabrielle gasped as the heavy iron fell to the floor. She rubbed her raw, bleeding wrists, looking up at the towering Alpha King. "It is over, Gabrielle," Alder whispered, his voice incredibly gentle, meant only for her. "You are safe." The aftermath of the battle left the great hall smelling of ozone, sweat, and spilled blood. The pack assembly, having recovered from their initial panic, watched in stunned silence as the royal guards dragged Lord Reginald and Lady Beatrice to the very center of the floor where Gabrielle had knelt just moments before. Alder ascended the dais, not to sit upon his throne, but to stand before it, radiating absolute authority. "Lord Reginald Harrington, Lady Beatrice Kensington," Alder's voice was cold, echoing with finality. "For the murder of Lord Henry Cavendish, for plotting against the crown, and for the attempted framing and murder of House Freeman, you are found guilty of high treason. Your lands are forfeit. Your titles are stripped. And your lives will end at dawn upon the scaffold you so eagerly built for an innocent woman." Beatrice screamed, a wretched, piercing sound, while Reginald merely stared at the floor, his spirit entirely broken. As they were dragged down into the very dungeons Gabrielle had just escaped, a heavy, collective breath was released from the assembly. Justice, true and swift, had been served. "Bring him in," Alder commanded. The heavy doors of the hall opened once more. Abner Freeman, pale, shaking, and supported by 2 royal healers, was escorted into the room. The poison had left his system, but the psychological toll of the past few days was etched deeply into his youthful face. "Abner!" Gabrielle cried out, abandoning all royal protocol. She ran across the blood-stained marble, throwing her arms around her younger brother. "Genna," Abner sobbed, burying his face in her shoulder. "I thought I lost you. I thought they killed you. I am so sorry." "Hush," Gabrielle whispered fiercely, stroking his hair, her own tears finally spilling over. "It wasn't your fault. We are safe now. The truth is known." Alder watched the reunion, a profound warmth expanding in his chest. His wolf, usually restless and violent, was completely calm, purring at the sight of his mate safely holding her kin. "Abner Freeman," Alder called out gently, prompting the boy to look up. "Your name, and the name of your house, is cleared of all wrongdoing. To compensate for the suffering your family has endured, the lands previously held by House Harrington will be transferred to House Freeman, effective immediately. You are the lord of those lands now. Rule them with more honor than your predecessor." Abner fell to his knees, bowing his head to the stone. "Thank you, your majesty. I swear my life and my house to your service." Alder nodded, then stepped down from the dais, walking directly toward Gabrielle. He offered his hand to her. She looked at his palm, then up into his striking amber eyes. The fear, the deception, the icy walls she had built around her heart over the past 3 days melted away. She placed her hand in his, letting him pull her gently to her feet. "Come," Alder said softly. "You need a healer, and we need to talk." He led her out of the great hall, leaving Gideon and Frederick to manage the stunned assembly. They walked through the quiet, torch-lit corridors of the upper keep, far away from the dungeons and the politics. Alder brought her to his private solar, a warm, expansive room filled with ancient tomes, rich tapestries, and a massive, roaring fireplace. Alder guided her to a plush velvet settee by the fire. He didn't call for a servant or a healer. Instead, he walked over to a wooden cabinet, retrieving a bowl of warm water, clean linen, and a jar of healing salve made from crushed silver leaf and aloe. He knelt before her on the plush rug. "You are the king," Gabrielle murmured, her heart fluttering frantically against her ribs as he gently took her bruised wrists. "You shouldn't be tending to my wounds." "I am a king," Alder agreed, his thumb softly grazing her skin, sending sparks of electric heat shooting up her arms. "But right now, I am simply a male, caring for his mate." Gabrielle stopped breathing. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of a jest, but found only raw, unyielding devotion. "You knew? In the dungeon? I felt the spark the moment I touched you," Alder confessed, his amber eyes locking with hers. He carefully dabbed the warm water against her cuts, washing away the dried blood. "But you were so determined to die for your brother, you had completely walled off your own heart. I knew that if I told you then, you would have rejected the bond, thinking it was a trick to force a confession. I had to prove to you that I was worthy of your trust before I could ask for your heart." A tear slipped down Gabrielle's cheek, catching the firelight. "I was so terrified, Alder. I thought I was going to lose everything." "You have lost nothing," Alder said fiercely, setting the cloth down and framing her face with his large, warm hands. "And you have gained a partner, a protector, and a king who will burn down the world before he lets anyone harm you again." He leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away. She didn't. Gabrielle closed the final distance between them, pressing her lips to his. The kiss started gentle, a tentative exploration of the bond tying their souls together. But the moment their lips met, the mating bond flared into a roaring inferno. Alder groaned, his arms wrapping tightly around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. Gabrielle tangled her fingers in his thick, dark hair, returning his passion with a fierce, desperate hunger. It was a kiss that tasted of salvation, of smoke and winter storms, and of a future they had both nearly lost. When they finally broke apart, resting their foreheads against each other, they were both breathless. "You will never see the inside of a dungeon again," Alder whispered against her lips, "unless you are giving the tour." Gabrielle let out a watery laugh, a beautiful musical sound that made Alder's chest ache with adoration. Weeks later, the snows outside Winterbourne Castle began to melt, signaling the long-awaited arrival of spring. The great hall was packed once more, but this time the heavy iron chains and the executioner's block were gone. In their place were garlands of white winter roses and banners bearing the unified crests of the Martinez wolf and the Freeman hound. Gabrielle stood at the front of the hall, wearing a breathtaking gown of midnight blue and spun silver. Her wrists bore no scars, thanks to the king's healing salve and his relentless care. Alder stood beside her, his crown resting proudly on his brow. He turned to the assembly, his voice booming with absolute pride and joy. "I present to you, not a prisoner, not a pawn, but the savior of the crown and the heart of this kingdom," Alder declared, taking Gabrielle's hand and raising it high for all to see. "I present to you, Queen Gabrielle Martinez." The hall erupted into deafening cheers. Abner Freeman, standing in the front row proudly wearing his new lord's mantle, clapped the loudest, tears of joy streaming down his face. Gabrielle looked up at Alder, her mate, her king, her protector. He smiled down at her, a private, loving smile that belonged only to her. She had walked into this castle expecting to meet her death, carrying the weight of a crime she didn't commit. Instead, she had unmasked the true traitors, saved her family's honor, and found a love that would echo through the history of the pack forever. She had taken the blame, but in the end, She had taken the throne. Did you enjoy this thrilling tale of betrayal, loyalty, and destined mates? If Gabrielle's courage and King Alder's fierce pursuit of justice kept you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button. Share this video with your fellow werewolf romance fans, and make sure to subscribe to our channel for more epic, heart-pounding stories. Ring the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.